Good afternoon, everybody. Good evening, good morning, depending on where in the world you are at the moment. And welcome to Trend Micro's Internet Safety for Kids and Families program webinar series called Managing Family Life Online. For those of you who are familiar, or sorry, not familiar with our series, we have been providing this as a resource to parents, to families, across the country and other countries to enable you to have some advice and resources, especially now as we deal with unprecedented times, trying to manage through a pandemic and our increased dependency on technology as a result. So today we're really pleased to have as our guest, a return guest, Dr. Michael Rich, who is Director of the Center on Media and Child Health. He's also an associate professor of pediatrics at Harvard Medical School, and we're pleased to have him back. We're also happy to have as our ASL interpreter today, Krista Lambert. And I encourage you all at any point in time to please send your questions in using the Q&A feature on your screen. And we will definitely have time to get to those because today is all about addressing your concerns. So please enter your questions at any time and we'll get through them at the end of the day. And before we begin, I just want to share a few thoughts about where we are today. And it's definitely been, it doesn't really feel like it's been 6 months or 7 months, actually. I think I've lost track. 31 weeks as of last Friday. But I think we've learned a lot along the way, and this is why we're actually here today. And so I think before I get started, I'd like to try and ask a couple of questions here on the poll. So let me just get started here. I think I'm having little issues on the poll. So actually, before I do that, I'd like to just go ahead and introduce Dr. Rich. Dr. Rich.
Hello.
Thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you.
And I imagine that that you've learned a few things over the last several months, and we're hoping to learn a lot from you. But I know, as we spoke before we got started on this session today, that we hope to learn a lot from the parents who are joining us as well, because these are really challenging times. So just before we get started on the poll, I just wanted to get a sense from you. How would you characterize the last 7 months as a pediatrician and an expert in media and child health?
I think that as a pediatrician, perhaps the most important lesson learned is that after really decades of focusing on me, we have to focus on we. We have to flip the M upside down, me becoming we, because we are dependent on each other to remain uninfected. We're dependent on each other when we become infected and need support. And we will be dependent on each other when a vaccine is available, because we need to get vaccinated. Enough of us need to get vaccinated that we are all protected. So I think that that's the important sort of citizenship or growth mindset approach of the last 7 months. I do think that we also learned that what has happened is not brand new, but is actually an acceleration of what was already happening. It is, kids were already using multiple screens for more hours of the day. All of this was happening, but the COVID pandemic has forced us into using screens for a lot of other functions. Prior to this, the screens were a playground for the kids. Now they are where they do everything, where they go to school, where they connect with friends, where they play, etc. And one of the wonderful things that I see coming out of it, oddly enough, is that as these kids are learning that these are very powerful tools to be used for important things as well as a playground, they're using them less as a playground because just like you and me, they feel Zoom burnout after a while. And after a day in school in front of a screen, instead of playing a video game, they are just as likely to close the laptop and go outside and ride their bike.
Well, that's actually a really great to hear that that's one of the trends that you're seeing. And so I think I'm able to share my screen now. Yes, I am. I'd like to ask everybody to participate in a couple of poll questions, which you'll see in front of you in a second here. And so the first of those questions is, how do you feel about your child's well-being right now? So how do you feel about your children's well-being right now? So if you go ahead and use the polling capability, please go ahead and answer. Are they doing better than you expected and adjusted really well? Are you concerned about their well-being right now? Or perhaps you're just not sure. You're not sure how to assess that. And so we'll just give it a couple of seconds. You know, I have to say, for me, it probably depends on the day that you ask me. Today's a good day, actually. So, but yeah, it's a good question to ask ourselves, I think, generally. All right, so it looks like a majority of you are actually, a slight majority of you are pretty happy with how your children have adjusted, and then another group of you are concerned. And so I think that that's understandable, of course. We've had enough time to adjust, if you will. But I want to go ahead and ask a follow-up question to this, and that is, let's see here. How do you feel about your children's ability to get through the next 6 to 12 months? And I actually use that framework because this is the time frame I think we've all been hearing when we might be coming out of this, when a vaccine will be ready. So go ahead and answer the poll questions again using the polling function below your screen. How do you feel about your children's ability to get through the next 6 to 12 months? And, I think for me, again, this depends on the day. So do you think they'll be okay? Are you concerned about it? Or you're just not sure how they might be? So, all right, we're going to go ahead and pull in here. So it actually looks like a slight majority again, or a majority now think they'll be okay. And actually that's very encouraging. I do wonder, Dr. Rich, if we asked this question maybe 4 months ago, if the responses might have been different, but maybe we've just been able to adjust, and human beings have proven that they are resilient after all.
And perhaps if we ask 4 months from now as well.
Absolutely, yes.
Yeah, because I think that we are starting to see a second wave of mental health issues, anxiety, feeling out of control. So I think that we are really capturing a moment in time that may have been different before and may be different in the future.
Sure, absolutely. And I know this was something that you were very interested in, Dr. Rich, and that is, and we invite everybody, this time it's not something to answer through the polling questions. This is something we invite you to send in the chat button. How are you as parents? What are the things you do to preserve your own mental health? And this can be anything from, I go for a walk, I binge watch Netflix, have a glass of wine, cook, whatever it is. How are you sort of helping, how are you yourself preserving your own mental health? So go ahead and share your thoughts there in the chat if you'd like. Yeah, and I think, one of the things that's really interesting, and we're one of these families, we adopted a kitten in March. Many people were adopting kittens and puppies over the last few months. In fact, they're very hard to find now at the youngest ages. But as we know, animals can be incredibly therapeutic. And I have to say, it's a lot of work to have a kitten, but it's a lot. It really is one of the best things we did. And I'm not sure we would have done it if the pandemic didn't happen. Okay, so I appreciate you all sharing your thoughts in the chat at any time. Again, any questions you have for Dr. Rich, and again, what are some of the things that you're doing to preserve your mental health? If you need to think about it, go ahead, but go ahead and share it in the chat.
This is Dr. Rich. I adopted 2 adolescent male kittens because I have 2 adolescent male sons. And you're absolutely right. That's the best thing. And one of the best things about it is that it gives another sentient being for them to care for. And that really helps them make that transition from me to we.
Yes.
That they're concerned about and nurturing some other entity than themselves. My worry is that with this huge, wave of people adopting animals, that some of those people who wouldn't have otherwise adopted animals may abandon them when this is all over. So I think we have to be careful about that.
Yeah, we should watch for that and definitely take action if that were the case. So hopefully that will not be the case. So I think to give some context before we get into the meat of our conversation, Dr. Rich, I wanted to give everybody a little bit of a background and just a reminder of a couple of things. Number one, as part of our program for providing resources and tips and advice, this webinar series is one of them. We try to bring you experts from multiple disciplines and tackling many different kinds of issues for you as families, as parents trying to raise children with the use of technology. But we want to also make sure that you understand that helping children to become, good digital citizens is not just about digital literacy and how do I actually use the technology, and it's not even just about pointing out risks and helping them to prevent those risks. It's not just about safety, but it's also about how we behave towards others and even towards ourselves. And finally, and this was inspired by you, Dr. Rich, many years ago, I remember you said that we can't just teach kids what not to do. We need to teach them how to master the use of the internet. And so the way we talk about it is how do you become savvy with it? Meaning, how do you encourage or practice good habits and good uses? Uses that are probably what we're seeing now, which is I'm not just using it for playing games and watching YouTube videos. I'm now actually using it for the reasons maybe that I should be using it for, like school. So I just want to remind everybody that you'll find multiple resources from us, and I'll point those out later on under all of these categories. The other thing I want to bring everybody back to is this date, because I think we should remember where we came from in order to talk about where we're going. So March 31 is the date that I like to think about, because that is the date at which the world experienced a collective change in life as we know it. And this map shows you, to varying degrees, which countries were shut down. And when we say shut down or restricting the activity, it is everything from travel restrictions to border closings, school closings, mandates around PPE, mandates around curfews, and so on. So really, that was sort of the beginning of the whole world shutting down. And at the same time, and I've seen you quote this in your own research, Dr. Rich, that 91% of the world's learners were no longer in the schools. School became home. Home became school. Home became many other things. But the schools were shutting down, and that was around the 3rd of April is the peak of that happening. So, what happened as a result? Applications like Google Classroom, experienced meteoric rise. I believe they doubled their user base in just the first few months of this year to 100 million users. And it's not that Google Classroom did not exist before the pandemic, but it became the substitute for the classroom in many cases. Video chat apps is another thing that we all, if we weren't already familiar with them because we used them at work, this was something that the whole world was introduced to. And 62 million downloads of all video chat apps happened in 1 week in March alone. 1 week in March alone, largely driven by Zoom, which in the 6 weeks between March and April, actually grew 728% in first-time installations. And House Party, which some people may have heard of, some people not, actually is the second that grew, the second fastest to Zoom. It had 50 million new signups in just 1 month. I believe it was between March and April. Gaming was another thing, which I'm sure we'll talk about in a little bit, and that is we're now at 2.7 billion gamers, and that is, we're not quite half the world, but it's getting close. And 83% of everybody who used to game was gaming more or much more than before the pandemic. And apps like, or games like Call of Duty Modern Warfare, Animal Crossing were some of the reasons for that growth, but even games like FIFA and Madden NFL and Minecraft, Roblox, you name it. The other thing that happened is the growth in social media, and just as of this past July, social media use is now up to 3.96 billion users in the world. That is over half the world now, 10% growth as of July. And 44% of us were spending more time on social media because of the pandemic. What drove this? One app, that is TikTok. TikTok grew in the first half of this year by 600 million downloads in just 6 months. They're now at 2 billion downloads. And the amount of time it took them to get to that number is, I think, about half the time it took Instagram, for example. And while we were spending a lot more time online, there was one more shift, and that was 88% of us were now working from home. So here you have this combination of chaos. The home is the office. The home is the school. The home is the gym. The home is the movie theater. And here we are. But based on the polling and the responses you all gave, it sounds like we've been able to adapt in some ways. And that's, I think, the good news. So I'd like to actually open up a conversation with you, Dr. Rich, about where we are today. And I know you had told us early on already about what you were seeing over the last 7 months. I think it's great that children are beginning to self-regulate screen time because they're just exhausted now. Actually, they know what we feel like now because we're on screens all day. But let's talk about the school, because over the 7 months, they were in the end of a school year, and that was interrupted. And then they experienced a summer break, and that was weird, like no other summer. And now they have gone into a third phase, which is school in a different way, whether that's hybrid or remote or in person. It doesn't really matter. It is different, no matter how you're going back. So how do you compare what kids are experiencing in this new phase of school versus what they were experiencing back at the end of the last school year?
Well, I am speaking from my own experience with my own kids, but also I'm hearing from every angle that the spring semester was chaos. That basically, when the schools shut down, there was no sense of how long it would last. So at the beginning, most of the kids, and some, if not more, of the schools sort of thought of it as an extended snow day for those of us who live in regions where there's snow. So it was like, yay, I'm out of school, don't have to do anything. And then it was a week, it was 2 weeks, it was 3 weeks, and the schools are sort of going, wow, what are we going to do now? And it was utter anarchy. Some schools jumped right in and had classes. Other schools more like went to be a kinder to the kids by saying, well, school is optional, and what school there is pass fail, and what we're going to pass you all anyway. And while they were doing that to be kind, it actually created even more chaos for the kids, because all of a sudden they were not being held accountable. And even those kids who are very motivated learners sort of said, wait a minute, I'm going to get the same grade as the slackers in class. Why should I bother? And the best description I had of it was they felt unmoored. They felt adrift. So really, we kind of staggered to the end of that year. Fortunately, many of the schools spent the summer retooling and recognizing that they have to do remote learning. And I've done a lot of work over the years with school systems in Canada and Australia, both of which have kids who live remotely. So they have a tradition of remote learning that they've already established. And it is very different than just turning on a camera or a laptop on a teacher in front of a class. The learning has to be delivered differently. It needs to be more interactive. It needs to be more accountable rather than less accountable in terms of what the kids are doing. And as we come into this fall, we've had a much more organized approach to it. But what's really interesting to me is the responses, not of the kids who, in agreement with your polls, a lot of the kids have jumped in and done very well with it, have really engaged with it. And particularly for those kids who are introverted and tend to be the quiet ones who try not to be called, they are actually thriving in this environment. Some of the kids on the autism spectrum are doing better in this environment than they do live. So I think that what we're seeing is the different variations in kids' developmental situation, the kids' personalities, and different groups are sort of rising to the top. Interestingly, the response in the parents has been really bimodal. We've got one whole set who are saying, oh my God, my kids don't get enough synchronous teaching. This asynchronous stuff I don't understand, and I have to help them with it. So on the one hand, we're saying they're not getting enough screen time. And another whole group of parents are saying, oh, my kids are getting way too much screen time. Shut it off, stop. And we can't make everyone happy. So I think the other piece of it is that we all have to be flexible. We all have to be more resilient. And in some ways, we are reinventing both the school experience and the family home experience.
That's, I think it's an interesting trend, because I think a lot of educators will tell you, and I think there are many parents who feel this way, and that is maybe it's time to, because one of the things the pandemic is forcing is if you're going into school, you're traveling in smaller groups. And you're in fact doing what everyone has wanted all along, especially with the public school systems, reduce the class size. And the technology is allowing for personalization of learning. So maybe we got the push that we needed, that some educators have been asking for and parents have been asking for all along. This is one of those things I hope will remain. There are many other things I hope will remain after the vaccine is available and the pandemic is under some control. So I really hope we don't forget. And I wonder if the kids will miss having, those Zoom chats with their teachers, which was always, I guess, possible, but there were a lot more restrictions at the time. Restrictions around privacy and, just one-on-one adult to child over technology restrictions. So we'll still have to be careful, but I think we've seen some positives coming from.
And I think there were also resistance among the kids to motivate that contact in some kids, right? Some kids have no problem, approaching a teacher and asking for help, but many kids really don't. And so this has, in a sense, created this as a tradition, created this as something that's expected. And it feels less scary, to be in front of a screen than to be in the teacher's office, right? So I think that's a really important thing. I don't think you have any reason to fear that it's going to go back to the old normal. The old normal is gone. And one of the things that this has done is it's really accelerated their acquisition of 21st century skills. And the normalization of those skills. And so I think that we will, once, all the dust settles, we will see that there's some real advantages to this having essentially turned the afterburners on and put us into overdrive and got us to a place we were headed to anyway.
That's great. Let's hope for that for sure for the future. And we'll certainly do our part to help support that. So I want to shift a little bit to some issues that I think are really offline issues that end up playing out online. And it's this. One of the things I think we have all experienced, and I guess it depends on where you live, but similar to differing definitions online of what privacy means. Where are your comfort levels about what you post online versus mine? We have differing definitions, each of us, of what privacy is. I think that there have been a lot of awkward moments among friends and families because we're all defining what is safe with regard to the pandemic. So I'm okay with you having two friends into the house because I trust that those families and other families are deciding, no way, no one's coming into my house. And so I just think we all experienced these very awkward moments through this past 7 months because we all had different definitions of what's safe. But the way that it spills out online is that I've heard that young people who are on social media will scroll through their feed and they will see photos of gatherings. And those gatherings may or may not be safe as we define that, or as science might define that. But it creates some anxiety because you're seeing it, And maybe the anxiety is coming from, I feel left out. I want to be with them, but I can't because my parents won't let me, because it's not safe. I'm anxious about getting sick, whatever the reasons. I feel like this difference in defining what's safe and then seeing it splayed all over in social media might be creating some anxiety among kids. I don't know. Have you seen that? Have you had that kind of experience, or any thoughts about that in your practice?
Oh, absolutely. And it's further exacerbated by the politicization of this. This idea that I should be free to not wear a mask. I should be free to get together with 1,000 of my closest friends to party and celebrate. And unfortunately, what we've done in that politicization of the process is to create two divergent sort of sensibilities and almost a civil war, if you will, but not a civil war between two geographic areas, but a civil war that's completely woven into the fabric of society. So you almost don't even know who you're talking to and what they believe. And I think that's a real issue. Now, you're right about seeing pictures of events. There's another thing too, is are these gatherings happening right now, or did they happen 6 months ago? Right? Are these, there is that asynchronous nature of it too. And so there's not only am I being left out of something that's happening now, but am I longing for something I used to be able to do and was part of my freedom and was part of
Yeah.
my world. So I think that there's a lot of that going on. And you started this whole conversation with the concept of privacy. And we now have two kinds of privacy. One is privacy within my contagion bubble, if you will. Those that I can take my mask off with, those I can be in the same house with. And, but there's also the privacy issue that we have always had, which is, what do I share online and how does that affect my digital footprint and what I'm putting out there? And one of the things that's really acute with preteens, early teens, and teenagers is that they are intensely focused on their privacy. But because their prefrontal cortex, which is where their executive functions of impulse control, future thinking, cause and effect, what we used to call the conscience or the superego, is not going to be fully developed for a decade or more. Their definition of privacy is not your and my definition of privacy, in terms of who can see what and who can know what. The definition of a 13-year-old of privacy is so mom and dad can't see. That's basically it, right? They could care less about the millions of people out there who could see it because they're not real to them. But they really don't want mom and dad knowing what snarky gossip is going on behind, closed doors with their friends. So I think that we have to be more present in our children's digital lives, in our children's digital worlds, not to police them, but to nurture them and support them in becoming the person that they want to be, the smarter, more compassionate, more respectful person. In other words, a good citizen in both the digital space and physical space.
Well, I agree with that. And I think that, because we're staying home more, the opportunities to have those conversations, logistically should be greater. You have more opportunities to be sitting down with meals together, to be having, setting aside time to have those conversations. So, I think, and we polled everybody about their feelings, about their preparedness for the next 6 to 12 months. And I always have to take a deep breath when I say 6 to 12 months, because it feels like a long time. Although we were joking earlier that it's been 7 months and it takes a little longer to have a child. So, hey, if we've done that, we should be able to do this, right? But do you think, I'd like to understand, how do you think what we're going through right now has impacted our children's, and maybe we don't see it yet, but maybe it's coming. Do you think it's impacted their ability to socially interact? Because they don't have as much face-to-face time to do that and develop those relationships. And now it's more online. Do you think that's actually, it's been impacting their ability to develop social skills?
Yes, but I don't necessarily think it's a bad thing. In other words, the cues that you get through a screen are essentially attenuated compared to what you get in real life and in physical proximity to someone. I find that after a day of seeing patients virtually through a screen, I'm exhausted. I am shattered, because what I'm realizing is that I have many senses at work when I'm physically in the same space with someone. You pick up their vibe. You get more of their body language because you actually see more of their posture and the way they lean forward or lean back. And in this case, you're busy trying to pick up all of those cues through purely visual and verbal interactions. And so you're working a lot harder to really get a sense of where this person is. So, on the one hand, that means we're very tired. On the other hand, it means that we are increasing the precision, increasing the sensitivity that hopefully we will translate out into real life. And we're much more finely attuned to people's reactions to us. I think the harder part of it is the asynchronous stuff, the social media stuff where we don't get to read people's immediate response to
Mhm.
what we may be sending as a fun little tease, but they may be receiving as hurtful.
Mm.
And so I think we need to really start to think about how something we are sending out asynchronously might be received by other people.
Well, I know one of those things is sarcasm. Sarcasm is very difficult to deliver over a digital means.
Yeah, right.
Um,
Sorry.
yeah, right. I got that though. But I think, that's good to hear that actually so it's because we can't use other senses to, connect with another person. We're fine tuning the senses that we are dependent on. And so you're saying then in children that might actually be um, a good thing. They're exercising skills that they didn't have before.
Well, please understand that as a pediatrician, I am a permanent optimist. And I am always looking for strengths, and what strengths can we build in these kids while helping them struggle with their limitations, whether they are, a neurotypical child or whether they're a challenged child in some ways. It's important to see the half full part of their glass because we're all half full. And one of the things that I really am concerned about, but I'm really working on is understanding that how can we be authentic in the online
Mm.
space? I think that we've made some mistakes with social media. We have used social media the way corporations use it to market ourselves to the world, to show what a great life we have. Look at my cool vacation I'm on. Look at my hot new boyfriend. Look at, whatever, right? We're not being authentic. We're not being vulnerable and talking about our limitations. And if you think about the true, deep, sustaining friendships we have, they are built on our limitations and on our need for each other, not on our strengths and how wonderful we are. We lost a lot when friend became a verb. And we really need to take a step back and say, how can I be true to myself? How can I be respectful of myself and of others in this space in ways that help these tools bring us closer together, make us more connected?
That's a great way to put it. And I love that phrase that we lost a lot when friend became a verb. I'm going to be thinking about that one for a while. I think, being more deliberate about, it's so easy to friend. It's so easy to just follow and connect. It's in real life, it's much harder to develop a close relationship, authentic relationship with another person. It takes work. It takes commitment, it takes patience, it takes both sides. And that's something I think social media cannot really truly replace. Um, it can only enhance what we've already maybe invested time in terms of those relationships.
I think we are asking too much when we ask the technology to do anything for us. It's what we do with the technology that matters, right? And so we're not looking for social media to replace relationship building any more than we're asking a telephone to replace a conversation. It's a way of conducting that relationship. It's a way of building it. And again, confessing that I am the perpetual optimist, I think that if we can use social media to be authentic, to be true to each other, it can be an instrument of peace in the sense that if a young person in one country is in a social media relationship with someone in another country and their leaders basically say, that other kid is the enemy, pick up a gun and go after them, the kids are going to say, forget about it. I know this other kid better than I know my leader. Why should I listen to you? And if we can use these tools right, and we can use them to be kind and empathetic and compassionate, we can build a true global village, as Marshall McLuhan predicted.
I think it's a great aspiration for sure, and I have a lot of help. I have a lot of hope in this upcoming generation for sure. They certainly can't do worse than we have, I think, as the previous generations who preceded them.
Right.
You know, it's really in them, and we all need to be those optimists as parents, and really just as the generation before them, and encourage them to do that. So I think I'd like to turn it over to others. I'd like to encourage everybody to put questions into the Q&A anytime, and we will get to your questions. You know, I think one last thing I want to ask you before we get to those questions are what does healthy physical, mental, digital wellness, what does that look like? What does that look like to you for a child?
I think that it is a child who is comfortable in her own skin, who is at peace with herself and others, who is seeing the world as an adventure rather than a scary place, who is seeking out true connection in the deep and sustaining ways that we are connected with each other, and not in the sense of connectivity. And that's one of the real pitfalls we seem to have fallen into, is we have substituted connectivity for connectedness in the deep and sustaining ways that we as humans need to be connected with each other. And so it's about being comfortable within oneself, but also within one's human circle, in one's human universe. So it really is the we as well as the me.
Well, that's great to know, and I think that this is probably something that describes adults.
Oh yeah.
Too, not just children. You know,
we're just overgrown children. That's all we are.
Okay, you said that part out loud. But yes, that's right. That's right.
Aging is mandatory. Maturing is optional.
Yeah, absolutely. And so I think, you know, the last time we had you on, we talked about screen time. I think parents still worry quite a bit about this. Partly it's a projection of their own guilt because they have to use it for school. But then mom and dad are trying to get some work done. So please go over there. Here, take the iPad, and, you know, I'll check in with you again later on. So, you know, are you seeing any concerns about the screen time? Have you had, you know, is that something that's getting worse or better from your practice or experience?
Screen time is definitely getting more. But I would also argue that the evidence shows that screen time limits, as we used to have back in the day of only television, are really an obsolete concept. There are screens in virtually every environment we're in. We have screens in our pockets. We have them on our wrists. We live with screens all around us. So it is really important for us to take a step back and not talk about what the amount of screen time is, so much as what we're doing with that screen time, and the context in which we're doing it. So what is the content and what is the context? Content being, of course, you know, if it's schoolwork, good. If it's educational or entertaining in positive ways, good. If it is just sort of mindless gaming or whatever, maybe not so good. So that's one piece. Context is the other piece. Is it something that in one context, texting with your friends when you can't be with them in person is fine, unless you're at the dinner table, or unless you're having a conversation with mom and dad or playing a game. And so really the issue of screen time is not one of total duration, but what am I not doing because I'm on a screen? And what is the relative value and sustaining value of that to me? So, you know, if, you know, gaming is fine unless it's keeping you from going outside and shooting hoops with your friend, right? So I think it's really more about having a balance between screen time and non-screen time. And maybe we should start thinking about non-screen time limits, you know, now, and sort of say, okay, I'm going to block out 2 hours a day where I'm not on screens at all. Or there's some people who observe a digital Sabbath and have one 24-hour day every week that everything's off. And I think that that's the better way to be thinking about it. And the final thing I will say is that the whole idea of limiting screen time is really left over, is a vestige of the days when television was the only screen we had. And when most of our use of television was, quite frankly, as the electronic babysitter. And so to be conscious of when we are using that screen of as a distraction rather than as a vector of information, a vector of social interaction. And ultimately, you talked about guilt. We've got to put our parental guilt aside. You know, we waste a lot of energy feeling bad about things that happened or whatever. Let's just be mindful in our use and in our parenting, and bring our parenting into the digital space. It's the same way we bring it into physical space, which is bring those skills to bear on your child's digital life. You're not, you know, to be excluded from your child's digital life. And I think that that's one problem we often have as parents, is we kind of check out from their life on YouTube or TikTok or you know, Facebook, because we feel like, oh, they're so much better at it than I am. I don't really understand it, and I'm going to check out. But we're still trying to raise them to be good human beings, and that has to take place in the digital space as well.
That's great. You know, and I think one other question we have here is, what can we do to help our kids persevere for the next several months?
What can we do to help us persevere for the next several months? Right. You know, I think first of all, we have to model good digital citizenship and healthy digital use. I am as concerned about parent screen time and the effect that has on the children as I am on the kids' screen time. I often ask my patients when their parents are not in the room, what could your parent do better? Which is pretty subversive if you think about it from the parent's perspective. But overwhelmingly, the first thing out of their mouths is, pay more attention to me. You know, that they feel like their parents have checked out, that their parents are staring at their phones or answering emails or whatever, and that, you know, that takes priority over them. And so I think that we have to take a step back and not only, you know, help our kids self-regulate, but self-regulate ourselves. And that's both to be present for them, but also to model good healthy digital use.
That's a great way to close this. And I think, you know, I'd like to invite everybody on to put in the chat, you know, how are you, here we are working from home, and I'd love to hear from people. How do you, the line is blurred. When you're done with work, you literally step, you know, 5 yards and it's home now. So what are some of the things you do to make sure you're done with work and now you're on to your family life? So go ahead and share that in the chat. I have to say that I've committed to cooking a lot more than I ever did before. So I'm cooking about, you know, 5 nights a week now, which I never would have done before in the pandemic. And so knowing that there are hungry people waiting to eat is that promise I made is really what forces me to make sure laptop down, time to leave the room and go be with my family and take care of them. But what are some of the people in the audience, if you could share, what are things that you do to make sure that line between work and home isn't blurry?
I would venture to say that line was already blurry before the pandemic. that we brought
Good
our
point.
work home with us. We were answering emails when we should have been playing with our kids. We were being available to our work or thinking about our work during times where we should have been available to the children, to the family, and to cook for that matter.
Yes, absolutely. And so I would invite you all to continue sending in questions, sending in the chat. I think one of the things is I love what people have been saying, both about how they've been in, only we as panelists can see this, but people have shared some really wonderful ideas of how to preserve their mental health, how they're actually drawing that line between work and home. And I think as communities, I would also encourage that we keep on talking to each other about these issues. We don't just have the conversations with our children, but even our friends and neighbors. I joke about this game Among Us because it's just exploded over the last, few months. And, just asking people, hey, have you heard of this game? My kid's asking me to use it. What is it? Are you allowing it? And so on. Those are really good opportunities to connect with your community on the issue of technology in our kids' lives. And so I'd like to just close with a couple of things to share with the audience. Once you actually leave this session, you'll be asked to complete a survey, and you will see a survey that if you're willing to put your name in it, email address, you may be one of our winners for a free copy of Trend Micro Maximum Security, which would protect up to 5 devices in your home. And I'd also want to point you to our website, internetsafety.trendmicro.com, where you'll find a lot of resources and information and tip sheets. But I'd also like to point you to Dr. Rich's organization, the Center on Media and Child Health at cmch.tv. And there you'll find, I think, this great digital wellness guide, which is informed by your research and the science of how to talk to your kids at different age ranges when it comes to their use of technology in healthy ways. And I think this new resource, Dr. Rich, which was the digital wellness and the return to school, which I think you can find on the same website.
Yeah, I will say that it's available in Spanish as well as English. And in process right now are multiple other languages, from Mandarin to Russian to Portuguese, French, and Hindi for India. So, we see this as a living, breathing document. So we will update it as more information comes in. And as you'll see, it's the 2020 version, and 2021 will probably be different. Let's hope it's different.
Yes. I do want to squeeze one more question in here because it just came in sort of last year. My teens have closed themselves up in their rooms more than ever since the pandemic started. So how do I encourage them to come out of the room and spend more time with mom and dad? Any advice?
Use food as bait. One thing, I think that this is one of those areas where you sort of have to build in structures for healthy behavior. So, say, look, if you want to eat, you will eat with the family. Single most protective thing we can do for our children, not just for their nutrition, but for their mental health, is a sit-down family meal once a day, at least. Because that's time when we debrief, where we let our hair down, where we, vent all the things that happened during the day. But it's also where we remember that we are family, that we are a group, and that we identify with each other and depend on each other. So I think that this is one of those things where you just got to say, this is the way it's going to be. And if you want to eat, you're going to eat at dinner time.
I think that's a great piece of advice. And cook something that smells really good. They can't help but notice that there's something good cooking on the oven.
Right.
Well, fantastic.
And you may have to lock the fridge for after hours foraging.
That's great. So I think, again, I'd like to invite everybody to go ahead and fill out the survey. We'll also be, we won't be back until the middle of November, on November 18th, when we'll be joined by David Kleman, who's Senior Vice President of Dubbit for Global Trends at Dubbit. It's a marketing research and marketing consulting company that advises toys and media companies that are dedicated to children. But some interesting research they've published recently about the trends to watch. I think as we go into the holiday season, I think it'll be very interesting to hear not only how kids were spending their time for fun, but maybe what's on the horizon for something for us to think about. So again, I want to thank everybody for their time today, for your questions and your participation. We invite you to send any feedback to us, again, through the survey, but at any time at internet_safety@trendmicro.com, and we'd love your feedback. Dr. Rich, thank you so much for joining us today. And we plan, one of the good things that came out of this pandemic was this webinar series. So we foresee this being an ongoing resource and forum. So we'd love to have you back, of course.
And I'd love to be back.
Very great. Thank you so much. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you, Krista.
Thank you, Krista.
Now I see the beauty